So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Andy van den Doppelsteen from the Delft Technical University. He's a civil engineer who graduated in 1993 and then he did a PhD in technical sciences, also at TU Delft in 2004. And today he's professor in climate design and sustainability. So climate design and sustainability apparently are two topics that are separated, but they are together in a department where he is belonging to, which is the Department of Architectural Engineering and Technology. Since 2021, he's also the sustainability coordinator of TU Delft, and in that capacity, he produced a document. Here I have a document of 250 pages called Sustainable TU Delft, with a vision, ambition, and action plan for a climate university. And since we are also here in Ghent working on designing a new campus here on the campus Ardooien, where actually four faculties will eventually find their home. And we're also hoping to get a sustainable campus here in Ghent. I think it's very interesting to hear what our colleagues at TU Delft did or are at this moment doing in order to make the TU Delft campus more sustainable. You can see here on the picture that it's a similar situation as here. It's a big area with high buildings, a street, also a tram in the middle, which is very interesting. That's also sustainability. So he is working at this moment on sustainable buildings, sustainable energy systems, but also climate adaptation. So the two aspects. So first, try to consume less energy, less resources, and also to adapt for the changes. I think this week he still posted a message on LinkedIn where he said, well, look, climate change, we are reaching the tipping point and we will have to adapt to. He was talking about 2 degrees Celsius increase in the Netherlands. Now, if we increase the temperature by 2 degrees in Ghent, then we end up with the temperature in Rome. And if we increase it by 2 degrees in Rome, you have the temperature of Cairo. So you see what kind of changes are made. You also know maybe that in Rome it is very, very hot in the summer because it's a complete built environment, all hard surfaces, not too many trees there. It's too hot. And so this might also come here. So we have to adapt and also to prepare for this future. Our speaker is also a public speaker on many occasions, so we are looking forward to his performance here in this presentation. So we had a little bit of technical problems, but I hope that by now they are all solved. So I would like to give the floor, the screen, whatever, there is the mic, to our distinguished speaker for today. Andy, the floor is yours.
As was introduced, I am, apart from being professor, also the sustainability coordinator of TU Delft. And I will explain how that came to be and why I think that's really important. Let's just move on. I think it's unnecessary at the university to explain why climate action is needed. This is from the last IPCC report, basically describing how severe the measures should be to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And as many scientists now sort of conclude is that it's actually impossible because policy would have to change immediately and radically. But we still have to do that, of course, to avoid runaway climate change in the longer run. We see actually that it's already happening. So these are just instances of what has been happening over the last few years in Europe. Flooding, record hailstorms, of course the fires, the wildfires that were in southern Europe. Here up in the north we were still lucky that it didn't get that far, but we have been so dry in our last few years that it could have happened here as well in our dune and forest areas. And of course storms. Insurance companies can explain everyone that the claims for damages due to storms has increased over the last few decades, and it can only be related to climate change. So what I teach students in our university is that they have a great sustainability challenge to deal with, which engineers and architects in the past didn't have to deal with at all, or haven't learned to deal with. One is, of course, to become climate adaptive, because the climate is already changing. And so we have to be prepared for a changing climate in everything we design from now onwards. We also have to become carbon neutral to avoid runaway climate change in the longer run. Even if we can't stop the changes that are already happening, we should avoid that, for instance, the Earth would warm up by 5 or 6 degrees. That would be a disaster to many ecosystems and to ourselves as humankind. Becoming circular is a good means to also become carbon neutral in many senses when you talk about resources, but it's also important because of the limitations to resources in the world. Adding value is a positive note to what is the challenge, because I believe that going into a sustainability transition will create a lot of advantages that will actually be beneficial to humankind and to nature as well. So contributing to happiness and biodiversity is part of the whole transition that we should be focusing on. Now, I need to start with a personal responsibility, because I came to understand that if we want a sustainable society, each one of us needs to become sustainable in the way we live. We can't say government just has to do it, or the industry have to do it, or the farmers have to do it, or China has to do it. No, a sustainable society is only possible if each one of us basically contributes to the goals that we want to aim for. And that's also why when I was giving my lectures on carbon neutral design, I started using myself as a case study. So I have this house in the middle of Delft. It's for sale at the moment, but it's still my house, so I can use it still as a case study. And for 10 years, I started measuring my carbon emissions due to various things. So to see, for instance, the house itself has a very low carbon emission. It's only for the heat pump system that I don't control. That's a heat pump system that I share with my neighbors, and I assumed gray power. Everything else is carbon neutral now in my energy use. I also have an old-timer camper van, so you see this, a Volkswagen camper van that I use for holidays. I don't use it so often for driving kilometers, but as you can see, it's already more than what my house uses or produces of carbon. I'm a vegetarian, which means that I will show that later, that I only emit half of the emissions of a normal person. And this is actually half a trip coming back from Vietnam after I had to be there for work. I added a holiday there and I said, well, okay, then the trip back should be accounted to myself. And as you can see, that one trip from Hanoi to Amsterdam is already more than, for instance, a whole year of using my car or eating food. So this made me see that flying is really a problem. Well, I'm also part of TU Delft, and you can say, okay, TU Delft needs to become sustainable, and I have my own personal life, but TU Delft is not a person. It's a collection of students and staff, and they all contribute. So I accounted also the emissions of TU Delft to myself, and this is, for instance, our Faculty of Architecture, which looks like this. And as you can see, it was renovated in 2013. So the heat demand went down by 50%. Electricity remained the same. But you can see that I divided basically the carbon emissions of the faculty by the number of students and staff. And then this is my contribution, you could say. All in all together, when I compared myself to the average Dutchman, I was quite low in my emissions, but of course I was forgetting one thing, and that was this one. So all the flights I had to do for TU Delft. I found out that in 2015 and 16, I got a silver card from KLM, the Dutch airplane company. And I calculated that they give you that when you emit 15 tons of CO2 due to flying. And they say, congratulations, here's your silver card. And just imagine that people also have gold cards, which is 25 tons, and even platinum cards, which is 40 tons or more. That's 4 times the total emission of a Dutch household in the Netherlands. So that's terrible. For me, I of course felt really bad about this, and I decided from 2019 onwards to not fly anymore unless it was really, really necessary. So my emissions went down for that. But in 2018, I still had some emissions, 12 tons exactly. And what I did then is to purchase a carbon killer certificate. which is a smart way to reduce carbon allowances in Europe. Because what they did is they purchase carbon allowances off the market, which normally are used by the industry, and then they destroy that allowance. So what I did is I bought 12 tons of CO2, then they destroyed this carbon allowance, and now somewhere else in Europe, the industry has to work harder to reduce the emissions. So it's not that I went to zero necessarily, but it was the best way to sort of compensate the emissions I had created. It made me see, of course, that TU Delft also has to become sustainable. So especially in everything we do, not just on the campus, but also from the campus. And so I was happy to be part of, for instance, a discussion paper that was presented in 2019. I don't know in Belgium, but in the Netherlands, we have a lot of discussion on the validity of climate change or anthropogenic climate change and the action that needs to be taken. Moment TU Delft decided to come with a position that anthropogenic climate change is real and that we need to take action. And it was really good to position our university there because there was a lot of debate in the public media at that moment if science was actually supporting that vision of the IPCC. And we do. We have client scientists. I know Ghent has too. So it's good to sort of position yourself there. That's also when we started a climate action program at TU Delft, which is a big research program focusing on climate adaptation, mitigation, governance, and climate science. So to fill the gaps in knowledge on these fields. And Professor Herman Rutzenberg is running that program, which now has a lot of postdocs and PhDs doing research on the themes. I myself was appointed to work on the campus, and I proposed new policy on the campus, which I proposed to the executive board. So I worked on a vision, ambition, and action plan, including the different themes that we need to address when we want to become sustainable. And later on, it was also accompanied by a calculation of the costs necessary for the investments. Now, 100 million euros seems like a big amount of money, and it is, of course. But 95% of that, so 95 million of it goes into the hardware, into renovation of buildings, into a new energy system, into planting trees on the campus. And 5 million is for other things like organizing events, doing additional research needed for circularity and so on. And it's all to be spent before 2030. Also good to know that our real estate company on the campus in total has a budget of 900 million. So it is only, say, about 11% of that budget that we are spending on sustainability, which is, I think, a reasonable amount. What is really important is that you need to measure to understand the figures, and carbon accounting, therefore, is the basis when you want to become carbon neutral. And there is a greenhouse gas emission protocol, and in the Netherlands, we use the CO2 prestatielader based on that. But I think this way of presenting the results doesn't say a lot. So you can't really say if this is a lot or not. So what I also try to do is translate it into forest area that is needed to compensate for the carbon emissions, so that trees that can sequester the carbon emitted. And I found that based on these sources of carbon emissions, so energy use, the use of water, commuter travel, business travel, food, and waste, we needed an area of about 1.5 times the city of Delft. And that's only the university doing that. So imagine how much the city in total needs. But this wasn't all, because we hadn't done a proper analysis of everything we purchase. So the procurement of furniture, equipment, stuff, building materials, also for new constructed buildings, made it twice as big as this. So procurement is by far the most important factor of carbon emissions if you look at that scope 3 emissions. That means that we need 3 times the area of Delft as a big northwestern European forest to compensate our emissions. So, well, it would probably look like this, but we can probably not find any place in Europe where we can do this if all companies or universities would have to do that. What is really important is a new financial approach. We need to get away from the current way of economic comparisons and look at the total cost of ownership of things we invest in and include a carbon price. And that's what we call TCO2. At the moment, we use 150 tons per, 150 euros per ton of CO2 at TU Delft, but we're going to raise it to 1,000 soon, based on German research that is reasonable enough to really get to a value that would compensate all the damaging effects of carbon. We're now using TCO2 in all important financial decisions. It's not just about the investments needed, it's also about the long-term effects and, of course, this carbon price, so that every supplier or every architect that comes up with a plan needs to do a carbon calculation as well. And we sort of convert that to euros as well. That makes the comparison already different from what is done in the past. Now, this is our campus, at least a large part of it, the central campus. And my motto is practice what we teach and preach, meaning we do a lot of teaching on sustainability, as Ghent does too, as I know, but we can see very little of it on the campus, not in the buildings or in the research that we are doing. So we need to demonstrate how we, as an organization, we can become carbon neutral. And I think universities should pave the way to get there. Of course, most cities are aiming for 2050 or 2040, but we as a university can experiment. We can learn from mistakes, and therefore we should be aiming for much earlier than 2040. Also, if you look at climate change at the moment, which it's going much faster, it's good to look at 2030 as a goal. The same applies to getting to a circular economy on the campus. So everything we use and produce should become circular by 2030. Climate adaptive. And climate adaptive, I sort of define that as being ready for the climate of 2050 by 2030. And that's simply because the extremes will already be way before 2050. And so we need to be ready for that. And we want to contribute to the quality of life on the campus, which aims at biodiversity, but also, the air quality and the inclusiveness and so on. So there's also social goals involved. Final thing is, which I already explained, we need to expose and test sustainability much more on the campus so that people can actually see what we're doing and how we can improve our society. Now, I'm not the only one. I've got a whole organization around me. So I'm the sustainability coordinator, and there's a core team around me of 6 people who support me day by day. And then there's some theme teams that look at specific themes, such as mobility or food or the energy system. And there's local sustainability coordinators. So the LSCs are representing the faculties and the support divisions, which you can see in that flower. So the colored petals are the faculties that we have in Delft, which are 8. And then there's supporting divisions that, for instance, look at real estate, that look at finance, that look at human resources, and so on. Everybody needs to join, otherwise it's not possible. Well, what do we focus on? First and foremost, I think education. That's our core business, and education, of course, in all universities has evolved through what was taught already for decades. We now have to sort of tweak it a little bit towards much more knowledge of sustainability, of climate change, because we want to create engineers that know how to get to a sustainable future. So we're now doing that. We're also looking at the campus as a living lab. I already mentioned that. So to demonstrate much more on the campus itself, to learn from our research. A very difficult part is the sustainable operations of our university. So looking at everything we do on and from the campus, and I will get back to that later. And of course, very important is the community involvement, the students, the staff, but also external parties, the partners and suppliers that we work with. Everything has to be involved. Now, looking at education, what we did is an inventory of all courses addressing sustainability and also the courses that do not do that. So we're creating a database for students where they can find those topics. What we want to do is getting basic knowledge of climate change and sustainable design and engineering into the bachelor programs for all faculties. And then offering more advanced, more specific knowledge in the master programs, which are much more dedicated to the specific areas. Architecture is different from mechanical engineering, and that's different from aerospace or from industrial design. So it's all leading to more specialized knowledge. And finally, we are working on a MOOC, a massive open online course, providing that basic knowledge on sustainability, and another one on climate action, which will be compulsory for all students, and also for students that come in at the master stage. For instance, foreign students that would not have had that basic information. Regarding innovations on the campus, we already have an experimental space which existed after our Faculty of Architecture burned down. And this is the site where we actually experiment and test in real life situations different sustainable options for buildings, for mobility, for the energy system. And one of the buildings that you can find there is our Solar Decathlon project of 2014, which originally stood in Versailles in France. And it's still part of the experiment. There's a family living in it from Ukraine, and all sorts of things are being tested here. It was a completely self-sufficient house, and as you can see, it was based on a typical Dutch row house, which you also have a lot in Belgium. Another project that you can find on the Green Village is this one, which is part of an office tower that was transformed to apartments for young people that have little money to spend on housing. And what you see here also is new PV panels at the facade to produce the energy needed. What is not on our campus is this building that was done for the Solar Decathlon 2022. It's still in Wuppertal, where they have a solar village, and where you can find some of the teams that build sustainable houses there. And this one also has the newest PV on the facade, which has a print of a 17th century drawing on it. And this was a top-up solution for an existing tenement flat. We want to do more of those living lab situations on the campus. And so we have, in total of the 95 million, we have 20 million for sustainable innovations on the campus. And the first projects have been approved of researchers that want to start such a project. So what we support is the investments in the equipment and materials, and the research hours need to come from the researchers themselves. One of the projects is the Firma van Buiten aquathermal energy pilot. So it's a building that's going to be heated by extracting heat from the water nearby. And we're going to measure what it does to the water quality and water temperature, and seeing if we can actually create an ice skating situation in wintertime again, which now, of course, is very hard with the water being 3 degrees warmer already than what it should be. So that's one of the examples. Now, sustainable operations, there's a lot of themes that we had teams working on, and our teams, it's good to know, we had scientists that are specialized in those themes. We had supporting staff that are from departments that can help to make it happen on the campus. And there were a lot of motivated students that joined in each of these teams. So altogether, they worked on the vision, ambition, and action plan chapters on these teams. What we always do, and that's what the graph on the right-hand side shows, is always connect research to the action on the campus, so that we can actually learn from it. Now, the EcoCampus project is focusing on biodiversity and climate adaptation on the campus, introducing much more green and water on the campus, which is now very stony and also has a lot of urban heat island problems. So what has happened already is that we have a Hortus botanicus that has experienced a revival and is becoming a very important place to do research and education. We have a biodiversity research that was done as a zero mesh assessment From that, there was a policy document that was produced and projects proposed, which are now starting. And on the South Campus, where there's new construction happening, all designs need to be nature inclusive. Well, and there's a few more. We have our own TU Delft honey at the moment from the honeybees that are on the campus, but wild bees perhaps are even more important for biodiversity. Our energy system is now, in terms of heating, it's based on natural gas from a cogeneration plant. But we are shifting now to geothermal heat being the source. So heat from 2 to 3 kilometers depth to be used for heating the old buildings on the campus, and the new buildings are going to low temperature systems. So here you see basically the event where the drilling started for the geothermal heat, which is now finished. So it's ready to be implemented, and it also will serve a big part of the city of Delft, because we only need a limited part of the geothermal heat that we can pump up. There's also research connected to it, high temperature storage. There's a digital twin being made for the campus, and the low temperature heat network with a smart exchange of heat and cold is going to be rolled out on the South Campus, which is our new campus part. But it all depends on buildings, of course. And when we look at new buildings, they need to be super sustainable, of course. They need to be compliant with our sustainability goals. We have an energy producing building called Echo, which is partly circular also. There's a new temporary building that was opened, and there's a lot of ambitious plans for the South Campus, which I need to say, in honesty, are not all going to happen probably because there's some financial problems at the moment. But all these buildings, of course, need to be sustainable. As many universities, renovation is in by far the most important part that needs to be tackled. So the large faculty buildings, which are at TU Delft mostly from 1970, they need to be converted, of course, and renovated, because many of them still have single glazing, non-insulated walls, and so on. So focusing on sustainable new construction is ridiculous if you still have old buildings that where energy is leaking. So that's what we're doing right now. Very important also in becoming a smart campus is IT, AI, and data management, but that will lead also to a lot of energy use, as you may know. So we're working on smarter computers that use less energy and programming to be improved, but there will be a lot of electricity that needs to be used for data. And that produces waste heat also, and the waste heat we should actually start to use that in our low temperature heat network. But I already mentioned it. It's also very important to use IT and AI to make our campus a smart campus that interacts in the best way to create the least emissions and also the best use of resources. Now, commuter travel. This figure on the right-hand side is a typical figure for a Dutch university, with most staff coming to the university by bike. But there's still quite some people that use the car, even if they live only, say, 10 kilometers away from the campus. And we're trying to get them into public transport or to use bikes as well, electric bikes, perhaps. And therefore, we're changing a lot of things on the campus to make it fossil-free. And very important then is also arrangements for staff, because at the moment, if you use a car, you get most of the refunds of traveling, and this is going to change. So that refund is going to stop, and we're going to give everyone a public transport card, and people will be reimbursed for walking and cycling. And walking is interesting, of course, because that was never sort of supported financially, and it's the most sustainable way to get to the campus, of course. As you may know, as I showed you, my flying was the biggest problem I had until 2019. So it's also good to know that short distance flying, and most scientists know that, has the largest emissions per person kilometer. And we decided not to go flying anymore within 800 kilometers from Delft, or 8 hours of train ride. And instead, people would have to use trains, buses, or electric cars if the trip needs to be made, of course. Like I'm now presenting online, many meetings and conferences can be done in a hybrid or a live or an online version. Student travel, that's a difficult one. We are creating insight now in how much students are traveling, also international staff, of course, going back and forth for their families. My proposal is to raise our own carbon tax on flying, to be paid by the department or section that is using flying, so that we can also use that to invest in sustainable projects or in compensation. So we're doing a lot of things on this part as well. And this image on the right shows basically the destinations that should be reached by train or bus or electric car in green. Then the yellow ones are the ones that are also well accessible by public transport, but for good reasons you are allowed to use the train, the plane for that. And even red ones are accessible by train, but then of course it becomes a time costly thing. But my faculty of architecture has a policy of first trying to find a trip that goes by train or bus wherever you go in Europe. And I did a trip to Venice and to Valencia and Barcelona, all by train or bus, and it's possible. You just need to take a little bit more time to travel, and that's fine. Okay, procurement. I mentioned that procurement is the biggest factor of our carbon emissions. And so we need to get to sustainable supply chains. Therefore, we use the R ladder, which may be also known in Belgium. So it's starting to rethink if you actually should use or buy something, and then doing all the steps downward. And recycling actually is sort of an end of life scenario that we don't want to anymore. But that should be applied to all things we purchase. And well, this is maybe a small example of what we have been doing already. So everybody at TU Delft now has its bring your own cutlery set, so that we don't need disposable cutlery anymore in our canteens. We have billy cups that are replacing the coffee cups. There's a new circular procurement policy for everything that will be purchased. We have new contracts with suppliers and partners, and there's the new waste management. That is the new contractor has come already, so we're also trying to separate waste better and to investigate if waste separation in the building is actually better than doing it at the end of the campus. And now the most difficult part of everything. So when you talk about energy, when you talk about circular construction, everybody is in favor. So nobody is against making energy efficient buildings or buying circular products. But if you talk about food, it becomes like a real personal thing. And but if we look at the carbon emissions due to different diets, and this one in the second in the second bar has one of the Netherlands. You see that there's a big difference if you use a lot of animal products or if you go vegan. Vegan is more than half less than what an average consumer does in the Netherlands. And I know Belgium a little bit. You love meat as well as fish, so this also applies to you as it does to the Netherlands. My requirements for food on the campus were these. It needs to be healthy, tasty, much more local, much more seasonal, more plant-based and less animal-based. And if it's animal-based, it should be animal-friendly and not just from the massive industry that we have. And if possible, bio-organic. But of course, that last one makes it a little bit more expensive. There is actually scientific evidence for that, and it's called the planetary health diet. It was presented by The Lancet, which you know as is a forerunner journal for medical sciences. It's called the Eat Lancet diet, and on the picture on the right-hand side sort of describes how the new division of our food should be. If we want to feed the planet with all the necessary ingredients, but also in a way that the Earth can carry it. And if you look well, you see a little red part and a blue part that is still animal-based, but it's only about 10% of the entire graph. So let's say 5% of dairy remains and 5% of animal protein. Of course, this is for Americans, so you have fish fingers here and you have chicken nuggets as examples of meat. But we decided to go for this Eat Lancet diet at TU Delft. So this is going to be offered on the campus. It's not entirely vegan, but it's 90% vegan, you could say. So that's a big change. And but we started with already with some vegetarian and vegan restaurants. My own faculty had the first vegetarian restaurant, but other restaurants that have evolved afterwards were also vegetarian and largely vegan. Now, we got the whole food industry on our neck by doing that, because they immediately started attacking us in social media. For instance, by stating that vegetarian food is bad for students' brains. Well, maybe you recognize these scientists, and they were all vegetarians. Of course, you probably recognize Albert Einstein, but Nikola Tesla and Leonardo da Vinci were also vegetarians, and you can't say that they had bad brains, I think. If you talk about vegan, then the statement was also veganism is totally unhealthy, but here we see some famous vegans. Maybe you recognize them. There's of course one scientist, it's Jane Goodall, but also Carl Lewis, the athlete, and Morrissey, the singer, are entirely vegan, and it doesn't mean that they are really unhealthy, I think. Jane Goodall has turned 90 recently. So, but this is the way that you're being attacked if you change that. So we found out that that it's not without trouble. I already mentioned this, everybody likes energy saving and sustainable construction, but personal behavior change is very, very difficult. And we as academics understand the need, and therefore we can sort of rationalize what we're doing, but outside world doesn't always understand. And we found that the media can be very aggressive in that sense. So we were also, we were called like a university that punishes people because they're not allowed to eat meat anymore, which is not true, but we just simply offer it less. But this is what you have to go into as a university if you really want to make some changes that are very dominant. And you know from the carbon emissions that food is one of the very important factors. In order to do so, you need to engage your own people. So this is a whole list of presentations I did in 21 and 22. Afterwards, there were still many more, but you have to sort of present it to people that they understand why we're doing this and that they are on board to support and maybe come up with better ideas also. So that helped a lot. And then, of course, it's monitoring. Are we actually progressing in the projects we do? So we need to stay carbon accounting, which is what we're doing. I'm expecting the 23 report this month. And of course, you need to report on many more sustainability things. And by 2030, we still need to compensate carbon emissions. It will be impossible to be entirely carbon neutral because flying will happen. There will still be products that are not entirely carbon neutral. So we will have to compensate a little of our emissions. But I hope that it will only be about 10 or 15% of what it used to be. So this is what we're aiming for, getting to that value of emissions, and then hoping to say that we achieved our goals. If you want to know more about our project, we have a sustainability website that describes the latest projects and actions and reports. And also good to know that we are part of a network of universities in Europe, and together with Chalmers, with Aachen, Zurich, and Milan, we made this publication, which can be found on the ID League website, where all 5 universities describe how they tackle sustainability. And I'm pretty sure that Ghent will also have an interesting story to tell there. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and then I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Andy, for your inspiring presentation. I'm not sure you can see me. Maybe you can stand here in front of the camera. Yes.
Now I can see you. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be questions. So is there anybody who would like to ask a question? What is the question? I'll walk around with the microphone.
I would like to thank you for the nice presentation and inspiring as well. As I understood from your talk that every person should contribute to sustainability. And as you said as well, it will be difficult if we rely on persons. So do you think is that it is possible, for example, not to rely on persons in order to reach sustainability by, for example, that government and decision makers can enforce rules that can lead to sustainability? I give a small example of my head. For example, if we say that, let's say meat is not sustainable, for example, it's not true, but maybe, for example, and then we say that government will make a high cost to buy 1 kilo from, let's say, 50 euros. Then it is like government just enforcing that all things that are not sustainable become more difficult for person, then they are reaching the goals. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, you are entirely sure and entirely right about this whole thing. Of course, I meant not necessarily that we as individuals in our life, if we change our own life completely, that we will help the world to change, because we also need the people that are actually part of the government, part of the industry, to make that change. So what I meant to say is actually that we all have a circle of influence. And with some people, it's very small. It's your own life that you can influence. With some people, it's very big. If you are a minister, you can decide very important things. If you are a CEO of an industry, you can also make a big difference in what the impact will be. So I agree fully that, of course, the biggest changes will be done by political decisions and by industry changes and shifts, or agricultural shifts. But we help to do so in our individual lives by making the right choices of what we do in the purchase of things, in the way we eat food, the way we travel, and that will also sort of put some pressure on the other parties, the bigger industries, for instance, to make shifts there. And you see that simply if consumers change their behavior in what they buy from the supermarket, then you gradually see change in the supermarket of what they offer. And that's what I meant to say. But you're absolutely right that, of course, it helps a lot if policy sets the boundaries for sustainable behavior, and also if industries are forced to do so. And I believe that implementing a carbon price in Europe would be a very strong motivator for that. So I'm really waiting for that to happen. And then, of course, we as university do not have to do that ourselves within the university, but then it's simply a European law that will help to shift that direction. But thanks for your question. This is a good way to think about it. Yeah.
So maybe I have a follow-up question. So as an academic and a person who cares about sustainability, I find it very difficult to know what's sustainable and what's not, because then you buy an electric car, but then you read in the news that maybe electric cars are less sustainable than petrol-based cars. So where can you find the correct information, or help to make the right decisions?
Yeah, true. Well, that's the advantage of us being universities, because we can do research actually to get behind the data. And you're absolutely right that some decisions might have an advantage, for instance, in energy use, in the reduction of fossil fuels, but can also lead to problems in the use of resources, like we now see with solar panels or with batteries. I believe in being honest about everything. Also, you know, we are allowed to make mistakes to finally get to a better solution in the end. So it's inevitable that sometimes you have a suboptimal solution to make a shift to the completely sustainable solution. So I think we need more research indeed on the impact of electric cars, for instance, in the long run, same as for flying compared to high-speed trains, for instance, and the infrastructure needed for high-speed trains, because sometimes there's a discussion also about the validity of the comparison. But that's our role as university. We need to be, we need to stay academically independent and look at the real figures and be honest about it, and not be ashamed to make some mistakes, because we are all people. We need to take the decision that we think is best at the moment. And maybe in a year's time we see it slightly differently, but then yeah, we can adjust. It's not, but staying in the old way is certainly not the solution for the future. So I think that's very good to realize.
Thank you. More questions?
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm the environmental coordinator, sustainability coordinator of Kent University. And I've read your climate plan, the climate plan of TU Delft, and it was quite similar as the policy of Kent University. The organization working together with policy makers, with experts, with engaged people, but also the content. And we have our transition plans, we have our climate plan. Since years, and we noticed that there was a lot of enthusiasm when it was about the ambition. And in the first years there was a lot of enthusiasm, but after a few years you see that goals, that the actions you take are not enough to reach the goals. I see you try to convince your people to take the train when their destination is less than 8 hours by train. That's not enough to reach the goal. Your commuting policy is not enough to reach the goals. So as soon as we started to talk about that, about system changes that are needed, there came a lot of protests. Not only media can be aggressive, also our own policymakers can be aggressive in that way. So that makes it now, we are now at that point. That's everything is stuck because it seems too activist, too much activist. We lose support of our board. So my question to you is how you manage the good governance of your plan. How can you give department heads the responsibility to reach the goals, to try to reach the goals as best as they can? Are they responsible for it? Do they have to report about it, about their team? Do you have a very strong leadership that said to the department heads, okay, you have to reach that goal, or you have to do the best you ever can? How you manage this? Because we think we have also a sustainability team. We have a very big network of people who are forcing the university to take next steps. But we go ahead, or we take steps forward, and these teams where the department wants to do it, volunteer. They are not forced to do it.
Yeah, thank you for this question, because this is really the essence, I think, of the governments on the university, and we encounter the same problems. But what perhaps helps in our case, that if you want to get, say, the leaders of the faculties and the directorates to move ahead with us, it is simply necessary that the decision is top down. So one of the important things that we managed to do is that first our executive board, they agreed with our ambitions. As you said, everybody's happy about ambitions until you start explaining what you need to do to get there, of course. But they said, so the first step for them was to agree to the ambitions described in our report. The next step was, okay, if we do that, then we have to define projects and actions on the campus that make it possible to reach those goals, and they agreed to that as well. That was step 2. Then the third step is, no, there's 2 third steps. One is the money, because if you said these are our ambitions and these are the plans that are needed for that, it means that you simply have to do the pre-investments for that, and that's when our board said, okay, let's go for that investment plan. That's the 100 million that I talked about, and the nice thing is that because of that, they immediately understood that their deans and the directors of the different departments, they had to be actually taking the lead in getting to those goals. So our board was asking all deans and directors to actually to comply with the rules that we now set and to come up with their own plans to get there. So depending on the faculty or the directorate, depends on what you came up with. And they have to report that to the executive board. Now, that sounds good, huh? As if okay, it's as we say, it's put into the line of management, of governance. But we still notice, of course, there's a few deans that are sort of reluctant to work on it. It helps that we now have local sustainability coordinators that are actually working for the deans to get there, to come with local plans. But even then, it's sometimes really hard. So what I'm now pushing is that, because we're not going fast enough, in our case also not, what I'm pushing is that the deans and the directors need to present their plans and their progress and what they are going to do in regards to the gap that is still there. And it needs to be done by the executive board again. They need to ask for it. What I notice mostly is that the leaders, or say the deans and the directors, are supporting our plans. Also people on the working floor, the staff and students want it, but there's a middle management level where people are used to working according to the old way for decades, and they find it really difficult to change their behavior. When we talk about the financial people, the people that are about HR, the secretariats that have done things for decades in the same manner, and to change those, I find is harder than to look at the top layers. So there's also a challenge that everything needs to dissipate from top down, but also bottom up, and that's our biggest challenge at the moment. So to get the entire organization enthusiastic about it, and I agree with you. It's always nice to support ambitions, but to make the real changes is the most difficult part of that. And so we're struggling with the same thing. So I'm also very interested to learn from your cases and what goes well and what doesn't.
Okay, thank you. We have 5 more minutes for questions. There's another question.
Thank you. I had the same question as Ruth. I was kind of wondering, how do you know you reach everybody, and how far does your network goes? Is it only professors, academics, and people who work in university, or do you give like every year a presentation for all your students and you teach the students who come by train or bike? How far does your go? And how do you know that people really follow it? For example, for links, are they obligated to buy tickets to the system of the university, and are they not buying a ticket behind? Like, for example, people shouldn't fall.
Yeah. I didn't really hear it really well, but I think this is about education, how to get teachers and education changed in an organization. Of course, it has probably been organized in a similar manner for a few decades. Yeah, that's one of the other challenges, of course. Sometimes my experience is that with younger staff, younger teaching staff, it's quite easy to implement sustainability topics into their classes. With people who are more in traditional sciences and who've done it for a long time already, it's much more hard to get that done. But yeah, the trick we found is that you really, it takes a lot of time, but you need to talk to the decisive people on in education, so program directors or course coordinators, to get them on board, and then try to stimulate them with, yeah, they can choose their own topics which are fitting their particular educational program, so that it becomes easier for them to accept it. And next to that, and therefore we need one of the board members who is focusing on education specifically. He is supporting our course also to create a basic course and MOOC to address sustainability and climate action, which should be followed by everyone. And then it either needs to be implemented somewhere in the bachelor or for students before they get into the master program. And we're now looking at what is the best option to do so. but he is very supportive in creating such an educational means, which can then be flexibly done by students and doesn't affect education as it is at the moment. So it's many ways that you have to travel, and it's not always easy, but getting people on board in a positive sense is the best way to do so than enforcement, I think.
Okay, thank you. So the Director of Education told me that we still have half an hour because at the end it's foreseen at 1:30. I was wrong. I have another question for you. So this is about all the stuff we do in the professional or learning context, but how do you try to convince people to also in their private life to use the same rules? Because, well, here what we see is maybe people take the train to travel up to 8 hours, but when they go on holiday, on a vacation, they are happily taking the plane again, because that's not forbidden by university.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in the end, of course, it's all about our personal carbon emissions, and our budget towards 2050 will go down that we have. So the permittable carbon emissions per person. What works with best in my case, I think, is that I'm entirely honest about my own emissions. So I showed that at the beginning of my presentation. I did my own carbon analysis, and I can honestly tell everyone that for me it's also a struggle. And sometimes my daughters also want to go on a holiday to an island where it's sunny and warm, and it's simply impossible to get there by public transport. And so being honest about the struggle that everyone experiences, but making the right choices in the most effective parts, I think is really important. So people should be supported also in taking small steps day by day, and showing the figures will help for themselves to be motivated, because saving energy will also save a lot of money, and shifting to a more healthy diet will also be more sustainable. So in that sense, I think be honest about it and communicate about it, and show that small steps can also make a big difference. And then, of course, the industries and government should also take the right decisions to help ourselves in the right choices.
Okay, thank you. So people tell me there's also somebody who attends remotely who would like to ask a question. So I cannot see it here on the screen, but please put on your microphone and ask a question.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, okay, so thanks a lot. I also related to the question of Rit. So when I talk to the dean or when I hear about the board of governance, and they always say there's little money for renovating, for example, the buildings. It's a very big cost. And then there have been a lot of savings recently on higher education. For me, it's obvious that we need to invest in this, but what kind of things can you use to convince that this should be top priority, and they should put the money, even though there is less and less money, but put it into this? And they always block you by saying, but we have to save and there's no money for renovating the building. So how do you tackle this?
Well, I think very essential is that total cost of ownership approach. Because if you think about all the energy used every year and what it costs to do that, then looking at a time frame of 10 or 20 years will always lead to the conclusion that renovating the facade is probably a good solution to save money also in the long run. So that's really important to look at take a longer term perspective than just looking at the cost. When people talk about cost, they mean the investments, of course. And there's never money for investments, but there's a lot of money for the exploitation of a university, apparently. So I think that's really important. Of course, it's not just about energy in that sense when you want to do renovations. It's also about comfort, about health of staff and students. It's about creating better buildings, and there's also different ways to do that, which are more energy saving. For instance, if we would buy all the elements that would make a building more energy efficient, like the facade or new building services, of course you need to invest a lot of money. But there's new business models that are also different. So you can also lease facades nowadays. You can also lease building services that can be replaced later by the supplier and can be taken back and recycled completely. So those are also means to sort of reduce the investment needed. But that's when people really find that the investment is absolutely not possible, whatever the effect on exploitation. But most important, therefore, is the long run perspective, and start to implement a carbon price as well, because that also makes a big difference. And seeing how much carbon you already emit at the moment and how much that costs if you want to compensate it, then investments in improvement of old buildings become much more important than creating the newest sustainable new building, because that will lead to a lot of material use that also emits carbon. We saw that with our energy neutral building, Echo. So it's energy neutral, it doesn't have carbon emissions from the energy use, but building that building led to 17,000 tons of CO2, which is a fifth of the total emission of TU Delft. And that's only the construction of one building. And that was a sustainable building. So just imagine if you just focus on new buildings, which real estate people really love, more than renovations, then I think renovations are the best way to get to your climate goals.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Nela.
More questions?
Do you have a certain method for events or academic things that people organize to make it more sustainable? Like, could a little bit of extra administration, like for instance, a note on how an event was maybe made more sustainable, could help? Like for instance, this event, they serve sandwiches with meat and even plastic water bottles, and it's a lecture about sustainability, which is quite ridiculous. With this little note, maybe, how can I make my event or maybe travel or my course more sustainable help, or is it just a waste of administrative time?
Yeah, well, it's a good thing. Well, when we started our sustainability events and discussions, we of course enforced that we had vegan or vegetarian food offers, also to make people aware of what is possible. So most important then was the good quality of what you offered, and not necessarily that you leave out the meat, but that you have very good alternatives that are nicer than beforehand. That helps. And of course, once you start doing that, people are getting accustomed to it. And when events again offer meat or offer these plastic bottles, we noticed that people started complaining themselves. Not even people that are in the sustainability program, but they saw, like, hey, I had this meeting and there were plastic bottles again, or there was meat offered again. How come? So it's a step-by-step development, I think, to get there. The main thing is, you need to practice what you teach and preach. So if everything we organize is according to our own rules, then people will understand that and they will follow the example, I think. At TU Delft at the moment, in banqueting and catering, vegetarian and vegan is the basis, is the basic option. And you need to put in more money if you want to get meat or other animal products in. And that's, I think that's the right way to do it. It's not impossible, but it costs more, and therefore people are not choosing it so often.
Thank you. There is another remote question by Benoit, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, hello. So I totally agree on the idea of not flying for short distances, but concerning the remote or far sunny islands, you can also jump on a sustainable airline, but most probably your seat will cost a bit more. So how do you deal with that with the staff as a university, but also towards students, because you have the very large competition of locals flying that make that they can jump on an aircraft, have a party in Barcelona and be back on a Monday. And that's not helping in helping reducing emissions by aviation.
No, absolutely true. Yeah. Well, of course, we try to change the behavior of students as well, and so that they don't simply fly for a party in Barcelona. But you can't influence that completely, of course. What helps to do if they do study trips, for instance, for excursions or exchange projects, or to stay a certain time in a different university, is, of course, the EU now has a sustainable travel grant of only 50 euros if you take the train. That is not making a big difference, but we are working on a sustainable travel grants for students so that taking the train or bus is actually becoming cheaper than flying. And I think that's really important. Two universities in the Netherlands already have that, Utrecht and Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And there it works really well, and it doesn't cost so much as people think in the management. It's about 20,000 euros a year, which is nothing for a university, to support students to travel sustainably, and that of course is a good means for them to be stimulated to do that in a better way. But of course, if you talk about intercontinental destinations, then yeah, flying is the only option. And then it's more a story of, do you really need to travel, or is it just a luxury? Yeah, people make their own choices privately, but yeah, the only thing you can do then is to make them aware and to ask them to actually help to get to the goals that we find important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Yes.
So thank you very much for interesting lecture, of course. My question is, suppose you have to rank decisions that you made. Do you have information about what's the return of investment of the different decisions? For example, buildings, you have shown it has a huge impact, of course, and of course it breaks down different elements of buildings. But they also have huge costs. So do you have like a graph, or don't? Can you tell us something about like what's the ranking of the decisions one should take if you look at it from a financial perspective?
Oh, that's a good question.
Provide the truth, I think.
Yes. That's the word.
Yeah, that's a question about effectiveness, right? So where do we need to invest soonest to get the greatest impact without it being too costly? Well, I think a very good decision was to get to the geothermal well, because that, of course, that is an investment that will cost when doing the drilling, but we already have a district heating network on the campus, and so the heat coming up now can be easily distributed on the old part of the campus. So that's an investment that is compared to the carbon emissions that it saves, a very cheap option. So that's a big return on investment. With renovations, I believe that's also a big factor. The change in diet on the campus, funnily, doesn't cost anything, but leads to half of the emissions for food. So there's also decisions that do not cost anything, just a decision that will change behavior in that sense. And of course, there's measures that will cost more, like the new commuter travel policy, giving everyone a public transport card, of course, costs money. And if you just look at the money, then you don't earn that back, because people are simply using the public transport and they have a card that costs, maybe a few thousand euros a year. But that's why I always try to think in TCO2. So think of the long run effects, take into account the carbon emissions that are saved, and what is the expense of that. And everything we don't save now in our actions, we will have to compensate in 2030, because and you saw the forest we need at the moment without any savings. If we stay at that level, then we need a giant forest of 9,000 hectares to be invested in 2030, and that's going to cost a lot of money as well. So that's how I threaten some people that do not want to take the right decisions. So that helps a lot.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions?
Thanks for the comments in the chat online. I can see them. Thanks for your kind words.
Okay. I'll wait for 5 more seconds to see whether, yes, there's still a question.
More technical one. You said we calculate with 150 euro per ton CO2. That's just to make decisions, or do you really compensate your CO2 that you emitted by flights, or maybe even by buildings, or how do you handle this?
Yeah.
Because we
Well-
ask 50 euros per ton CO2 and only from flights.
Yeah. Well, yeah, at the moment we have the 150 euros per ton. That's based on several researches, but that's old research actually. The latest research, as I said, from Germany actually indicates a value much closer to 1,000 euros per ton if we want to be really honestly compensating climate impacts. But at the moment, it's not that we use that value really in our budgets for faculties or departments, but it's a sort of a shadow accounting method. So what I'm proposing in the coming month is to next to the real money budgets, that we have a shadow budget of carbon emissions for each faculty and directorate, and that is going to be assessed every year with a limiting budget towards 2030. So we set the goal at 2030 at say about 15% of what it was in 2019. And then year by year, the carbon emissions have to go down by all these organizational elements. And they can choose whether they pick it from food, from travel, from the building they live in, but the budget will go down. Of course, they don't have to pay for it necessarily, but it will lead to sort of a new roadmap towards 2030. And with the carbon emission price that we are going to use, are already using, that's simply used for comparing different alternatives. When we, for instance, have more suppliers for vending machines, for instance, that offer drinks and chocolate bars. We have different options and we compare them, including a carbon price. Then we pick the one that has the best overall price. And the same goes for architectural designs for new buildings or renovation, and also for the products that we purchase. Then it really helps to include that carbon price. And I noticed that 150 euros per ton sometimes doesn't make enough difference. But yeah, helped by this latest research by the German ministry, we're going to raise it. And then I think it's going to make a big difference in the decisions we take. And that will help to get there more automatically.
Okay. So I have a question which has not been touched yet, and I don't know whether you have a plan for research, for instance, because also the research labs are also emitting gases, and some research labs create lots of waste, especially the lab. But you also have the university hospital, which has a huge impact, I think. Do you have solutions for sustainability in these in research and in hospitals?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Also with us, we have a few faculties that have complicated labs. And one of the statements is the smaller the particles you're focusing on, the more energy you need. So we do a lot of nano research, and those have a lot of cooling techniques that are necessary that use an enormous amount of electricity. So yeah, we encounter the same things. I'm not a technical specialist to solve these issues with labs and hospital equipment. So we need to involve the specialists, both the scientists and, for instance, the companies that deliver these products. Because a lot of these products we can't solve as universities, but we simply have to rely on what the industry is managing to make them circular or carbon neutral. And therefore, I think setting up partnerships with those companies that are supplying is one of the most things to take effective action, because yeah, as said, we can't unchange the designs that are there, but the industry can solve the issue of doing it carbon neutral, or to reprocess everything again, so making it circular. But I need the lab coordinators, for instance, to think along with me there, because I'm not a specialist in all these complicated technical labs that we have. And the same applies probably for medical sciences as well. So we need both academics and more technical staff to get there, along with the suppliers.
Okay, thank you. There's one more question.
I know a little bit more about the techniques because I'm working for the technical department also at Ingenieurswetenschappen. And the point that special is a very hard time, sure, because labs are using a lot of energy, but you cannot expect from a researcher that he's a technical expert. And for example, if you want certain buildings to get sustainable, it also costs a lot of money. So then you also ask your researcher to spend a part of their money in a more sustainable device. So they lose a part of their research money. So I think it's also, in my opinion, a job from the university and the policymakers to support researchers to buy more sustainable devices. Yeah. So, but if we ask it from the researcher itself, I think it's very, really difficult. But it's my opinion.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Maybe an inconvenient truth is that if we want to get to more sustainable products and more sustainable travel and more sustainable food, at the moment with our current economic system, it's simply more expensive. And what I'm trying to convince people of here at TU Delft is that for travel, for instance, we simply have to allocate more money if we want to propose a few trips during a project, for instance, and not look at the cheapest ticket price that is available and use that in the budget proposal. So including a carbon price already helps to do so, and that's something that's going to be standard now. But also, implementing more travel time, for instance, because if you take the train or the bus or an electric car, traveling might be a little bit longer than when you take the plane, especially for middle distance flights. But if people start to understand that actually doing that will lead to much more pleasant travel means, and you can work on the train while you can't in a plane, and you don't have those waiting times all the time, and you can actually add one extra night for yourself, then those things should be allowed by say the managers of departments and so on. But getting back to your question, I think yes, more sustainable products are often not the ones that are produced in the largest quantities, so they are usually a little bit more expensive, and we need to invest in that. And as long as we don't have a carbon price that is standard in Europe, then it simply means that you need to pay more euros, and that means that in projects there needs to be more money available to do so. At TU Delft, we can now demonstrate that if you include that carbon price, that it is not more expensive. But of course, in real payment, in the euros from your pocket, it will still be more expensive. But the other way of thinking, as long as we don't have a carbon price implemented in Europe, I think is very important. At the university, because we can demonstrate how this different economic system can function, and how it will lead to a much better climate action.
Thank you. More questions? I don't see more questions. So I propose then to close this meeting now. I would like to thank you for your inspiring talk and presentation, and also for answering the many questions that we had for you. We learned lots today. And since we are continuing to work on our own sustainability plans and also on our eco-campus here in Ghent, we are definitely going to look into your documents and maybe talk to you again in the future for further advice here in Ghent.
Yeah,
So-
but also likewise, I can learn from you, and so I'd be very happy to visit Ghent again in the next year to learn from what you are struggling with.
There is a very convenient train connection between Delft and Ghent, so that's not, you don't have to fly.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So let's thank the speaker with a warm applause.
Thank you very much, and good luck. Have a nice day.